Jim asked me to participate in the symposium, and I said, sure, would love to. Love being involved in what's going on here at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. He asked me, what do you want to talk about? And I said, well, I'm not sure, but it's not going to be practical. I'm sorry. I don't do practical. Now, that being said, I hope to cover a topic today that is kind of complex in nature, but hopefully my objective here is just to leave you with a point of view, really elevating this topic of the economics of attention to something that's a little higher on your purview. So you kind of pop above the clouds and see what's going on in our industry. A little background about myself. As Jim said, I run a content studio for a media agency. I joined Empower MediaMarketing and started up their content studio three and a half years ago. Prior to joining Empower MediaMarketing, I was part of the BBDO network, worked with Proximity, which is BBDO's global digital agency, worked at the Cincinnati office, and you can imagine in Cincinnati I worked with Procter & Gamble. I didn't work with Procter & Gamble in a traditional capacity. I worked with P&G Entertainment. I'm not sure if you're familiar with P&G Entertainment or P&G Productions. It's a side of P&G that has been producing media. Started with As the World Turns, The Guiding Light, and the soap operas in the 30s, and it's evolved to digital properties. They own the People's Choice Awards, not sure if you know that. That experience in working with P&G Productions and going from working at a digital agency to now being the general manager of a media property and getting that started up accelerated the convergence for me. I was using a media process to help drive marketing objectives. And that was really, really interesting for me. It was very enlightening too. So, that moment in my career helped me elevate my purview, see above the treetops and what was happening in our particular industry. I was fortunate enough to wear the media hat. I was also fortunate enough to wear the marketing hat. Now today, I stand before you with the journalist hat on, trying to make some sense of what's going on in our industry. And a lot of this has been discussed over the last 2 days. I've really enjoyed the perspective of a lot of the speakers that I've heard over the last couple of days. And when Jim asked me to talk, I wanted to take a different approach to the conversation. I think what you've heard over the last 2 days is a lot of mastery in the topic of engagement. And really what is it about? It's about micromanaging engagement. I didn't want to focus on micromanaging engagement. I wanted to share the concept of macro-managing engagement and this idea of the attention economy, okay? It's something that is coming about. It's something that is impacting us. We're not sure exactly how that is impacting us. But if you think about all the decisions that marketers and media organizations now have to make and the things that we have to pay attention to operate our businesses that we didn't have to do 5 years ago, it can be somewhat distracting. So what is going on? Well, I can tell you it's really big. Okay, how about that for an insight, an epiphany, right? It's not small, it's really, really big. Well, the point of this visual on the slide is not to suggest that it's big. We're having a very difficult time seeing it, feeling it, wrapping our arms around the enormity of it. And why is that? Well, we're distracted. We focus so much on micromanaging engagement. We're not focused on the bigger picture, the macro impact of the attention economy. And this result is, coming from the marketing perspective, put the marketing hat back on for a moment. All of these channels, all this technology, all this methodology, you ask any CMO who gets the same question from his CEO, is this building my business? I'm not sure yet, but it seems like it's the right thing for us to be investing our time and attention in. Well, could it be all just one big distraction until the market clarifies and we know exactly how we need to deploy our resources to help generate more business for ourselves? So as a good journalist, my process here really starts with a question. Ever wonder why these organizations are worth what they're worth? These 7 organizations collectively are worth $700 billion. To steal something from Justin, it's a B. It's billion with a B, to channel my Carl Sagan. Now, they don't really produce anything. Aside from some successful forays recently with House of Cards and Netflix, these organizations don't really produce anything tangible. Now let's compare them to the old guard, the stalwarts. General Motors and Ford are worth $127 billion. They operate in a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. When you compare these two groups to each other, the group on the left generates half the revenue, but the group on the left is worth 6 times more than the group on the right, or opposite. Now, I get sort of the future value of revenue streams, and I get lower cost of capital. I get all that, okay? But there's something else going on here, okay? These organizations are successfully trafficking, as Seth Godin very astutely articulates, they are successfully trafficking in attention. That is their primary asset, the thing that they are ruthlessly and fundamentally focused on, okay? It gives them a tremendous competitive advantage, and they've become wildly successful at this on a global scale, one that we really haven't seen before, and it continues to reveal itself. This is having a fundamental and profound effect on our industry, but it's not just marketing and media that is transforming, it's not just commerce that this is transforming, it's fundamentally transforming our economy. Economics is the study of how a society allocates its resources. Now understand what we're experiencing here just in the last 4 or 5 years, right? We're inundated with information and content. It's a glut. Content shock, some people call it. Hyper-information overload, okay? This is having an impact. It's having an effect on us, right? The argument here is that the human attention is now the fastest appreciating limited resource on the planet. It is appreciating faster than we can possibly understand at this point. It's becoming scarcer and scarcer, and the reality is it's a finite thing. You can't produce any more of it. It's been discussed over the last 2 days. There's so many hours in a day. There's so many people on the planet, right? We can't produce more of attention. But it's a mysterious thing. What is attention? Attention, if you think about it, is a process. Okay, it's the human mind working to decide what information you are going to amplify and what information you are going to inhibit. And when the human mind focuses on inhibiting all types of information and focusing on something, you get full attention. But that's a very, very rare thing, and it's becoming an even more rarer thing in our lifestyles. Now, attention is hard to verify. Some people have more than others. It's also hard to validate. Case in point, you all appear to be paying very close attention to me, but I really can't tell. So we need more of it, but we can't produce more of it, okay? These two charts up here are a juxtaposition of what's happening in our world today. The red is the growth of information, okay? The blue is the growth of population. If you look at the gap between the slopes of these curves, it's growing. What that gap represents is the attention gap, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. But that attention gap represents something for our industries. It represents an opportunity for innovation and disruption on a scale, on a level that we have never seen before. To dimensionalize this further, borrow some language from Esther Dyson. You may be familiar with Esther's writing. She is an economist. She's an accomplished journalist. She is a Wall Street analyst. She spends most of her time these days with her project EdVenture, where she's in the process of helping startups, incubating startups that are focused on sort of disrupting certain sectors of our economy that are really sensitive to technology. As Esther puts it, thanks to the efficiency of our surplus economy, we have more surplus time on our hands, more idle time. We have that luxury now. And many more of us are affording this enormous capacity. Where we're spending it is on economic inactivity. Okay? We're just consuming more content. If you think about what this symposium was about, we're all trying to macro or micromanage engagement because we want more people consuming our information, consuming our content. But there's a whole cast of people out there, entrepreneurs, that are paying very close attention to this economic inactivity. And they're focused on their entrepreneurial activities on trying to gain or ascertain a disproportionate share of that economic inactivity. What Esther is basically saying is a new market has formed. And on one side, you've got people who are trying to process information more efficiently. And on the other side, you have people who are trying to deliver more efficiencies to that constituency. What this means is we're seeing a rise of an intermediary, okay? There's a new kind of entrepreneur coming up, and they're invested in producing, curating information or content, not necessarily to monetize, okay? They're focused specifically on just ascertaining a disproportionate share of attention. And for every level of intermediation, there will be an equal level of disintermediation, okay? One organization that had the attention may lose that attention to many organizations, and many organizations may be losing that attention to one organization. This disintermediation is happening. We've kind of seen a lot of that over the last 2 days. Two great examples of that are these two organizations. They may not be the most acute examples of this, but they are probably the most profound examples of intermediation and disintermediation that we've seen over the last 10 years. Again, these two organizations collectively are worth $400 billion now. They account for about 50 to 60% of how traffic gets distributed on the internet. You can't run a communications business, marketing, media, right, or any other organization without using them in some capacity to help drive your business. Now, what's interesting about these two organizations is really the relationship between each other. We're not going to spend too much time on Google because I think for the folks in this room, that story is already sort of baked, right? It's the other organization, Facebook, that is probably catching most of our ire. Now, what I'll do is I'll share my perspective as a marketer as it relates to Facebook, okay? You probably read the trades. I work in the marketing field. I can tell you that the brands are very, very upset with this organization, because they went into Facebook with the promise of generating an intimate or having an intimate, direct relationship with the audience. And what they're experiencing now is they're having to spend a lot of money to maintain those relationships. That's not what they signed up for. And the reason this is happening because over the last 3 years, Facebook has made a couple adjustments to their business. They're changing their mobile experience, which is a big thing. But more importantly, they've adjusted the algorithm. And that adjustment in the algorithm is having a huge impact, not only in the marketing industry, but it's having a huge impact on the media industry as well. The stats up here on the screen come from Pollock. Yeah, it's no surprise that Facebook is now, 1.4 billion users. There are 1 billion users just on mobile devices. What's more compelling here is in the last 3 years, they've increased their engagement with the audience. The average person was spending 15 minutes a day on Facebook. Now they're spending about 40 minutes a day on Facebook. The last stat is probably the most compelling. It is the most compelling to me. Where 3 years ago, Facebook represented about 6% of the referral traffic, sort of to the white web, the open web. Now it's 25%. What's happening here is Facebook is in the process of disintermediating Google. The ramifications here, okay? More of the publishing industry is becoming more reliant on Facebook. That was shared yesterday. We talked about that. It's sort of like an open sore. We sort of want to talk about it. Not sure where that's going to go. The ramifications of that for marketing are profound. I have a lot of conversations with our marketing clients on how to think about Facebook now. Okay, and what's the reality here is if you kind of pay attention to what's happening in your social streams, it's less user-generated content, and it's less branded content. It's a lot more editorial content and entertaining content. It's that editorial entertaining content that is crowding out the user-generated content, and it's crowding out the branded content. You have 3 different constituents here. You have consumers, you have brands, and you have the media, all competing for these streams. It's getting more and more expensive. Someone's going to lose. Someone's going to get disintermediated here. Now, Facebook is in the process of, a few years ago, will they ever hit 1 billion users? Well, they did that pretty quickly. They did it pretty quietly, right? You think about this, they're on their way to sort of claiming an hour of our day, right? The majority of the people on the planet spending an hour of time on this, on this platform, the 24-hour day is now the 23-hour day because Facebook owns an hour of our day. We talked about the disintermediation, okay? The organizations up here really represent how traffic gets distributed on the internet. The big news over the last few years is that social search and social discovery now outweighs search, traditional search. You got a lot of organizations up here that are growing rapidly. Taboola and Outbrain. I'm sure most of the organizations here use Taboola and Outbrain in some capacity, but these are billion-dollar companies now. Why? Because not only are the media using it to supplement what they're trying to do in their businesses, but the marketer is doing that as well. And it's not just sort of restrained to the traditional internet. Okay, the Internet of Things, and again, something that's been widely discussed over the last 2 days, will be sort of this grounds for even greater disruption and innovation and disintermediation. A couple examples here. So Uber, Roadie, and Lyft I think, represent three organizations that are sort of on the new wave of intermediaries. They're riding that wave of sort of the sharing economy. PricewaterhouseCoopers believes that the sharing economy will be $350 billion in the next 10 years. Remember what Google and Facebook were over the last 10 years. They become $400 billion organizations. So we're talking about a level of disintermediation and disruption that's it's sort of on the same sort of level of volume that Facebook and Google were over the last 10 years. Hard to have a conversation about the attention economy without mentioning these guys. I'm not going to spend too much time, because we've got 4 minutes left. But they're on their way to be the first trillion-dollar company. That's trillion with a T. The very provocative article in the Wall Street Journal just a few weeks ago, written by Matthew Crawford. He's the author of The World Beyond Your Head. The title of the article was "The Cost of Paying Attention." What Matthew is saying here, to engage in inventive thinking during those idle hours, what our surplus economy affords us now, requires silence. Okay? What he's basically saying, right, is we have to be very judicious as organizations on what we are spending our time on and how we are engaging in using someone else's time. Further, when the focused can treat the minds of the distracted as a resource, this is not merely creating wealth, but a transfer of wealth. He's sort of warning us a little bit. But what he's also saying is this is an interesting way of sort of explaining the precarious relationship between Facebook and the publishing community. Okay? Collectively, what Matthew Crawford and Esther Dyson are basically saying is that organizations are going to be much more focused on managing their attention and how they allocate attention to building and innovating their businesses, and far more attentive to how their audiences are consuming their information and their content. The next and final frontier for some of these marketers is really the human mind. Now, the way I look at this, sort of like a Jackson Pollock painting, we're all in the same industry, and it's getting super complex, it's getting super messy. But at the end of the day, those organizations that can make some sense of what this abstract mess is will be the ones that emerge with higher value, with a bigger audience, with more attention. So I leave you with sort of 2 points of advice. One of them is, a lot of the conversation over the last 2 days was about micromanaging engagement. But engagement is not just a tactic, engagement is not just a strategy, and engagement is a way of doing business, and it will be the way of doing business moving into the future. The other piece of advice that I give you and your organizations is to judiciously allocate where your organizations are spending your time and attention. And obviously, treat the time and attention of the audience as you're trying to ascertain attention from very preciously as well. I thank you for your attention.
Real quickly, any questions? Any questions? I have, yeah, go ahead.
Austin Federa, KBIA. So looking at these platforms now, as you talk about them becoming new intermediaries and how this is structured, Facebook is now asking us to produce more native content just for Facebook. Their video algorithms are really targeted in that way. It's an interesting value proposition, because at that point, they're potentially giving us something. They're not giving us referrals, they're giving us engagement, but the monetization doesn't seem to be there yet to support the kind of economy they're trying to create. If they don't want to be distributors of others' content, but they want to be the houses that actually hold it. Where do you see that going? It's hard to say for something like the New York Times, yeah, we'll put content that's usually behind our paywall only on Facebook if you don't give us the tools to, in some ways, have like an SSO for subscriber logins, or how does that play in?
Well, I can't answer where it's going, okay? I'm trying to give you a roadmap for how to think about that. And at the end of the day, if you're evaluating by how much monetization value you're going to get out of that, but you're missing the point, you're missing the forest through the trees, because ultimately Facebook is taking something away from you. They're taking the ability to distribute directly to the audience. And that might be a larger opportunity cost than the revenue that you might be able to claim in the opportunity, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Peggy Holman, Journalism That Matters. I was struck by the quote about silence and its role in creativity and innovation. And I'm wondering and reflection is what enables learning. I'm wondering if you would reflect on your thoughts on that.
Well, I can tell you over the last 3.5 years, being able to focus, on a certain application of a methodology, helping marketers think about being publishers, right? And that slowly materializing has given me a lot of time to sort of think, right? And think about how I want to propose that to organizations and how organizations should be utilizing that. In the article that Matthew Crawford, wrote, he sort of, he uses the airport analogy. There's a part of the airport where sort of the wealthy can like hide away and be distracted and not be inundated and deluged with all the advertising messages. And then there's sort of the plebeian commons. It's the place where most everybody else. That metaphor, I think, works for us in the business environment, okay? If you can't silence and if you can't focus on where your attention goes, are you missing an opportunity to really innovate? So I think it is very, very impactful, very important to think about.